My guest at this time is Gordon Chang. He's a highly regarded expert on East Asia policy. We speak to him often about challenges posed by China and North Korea. He is also the author of Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World. We want to get Gordon's insights on the meetings between Kim Jong-Un and Vladimir Putin this week in Russia, as well as the Washington Post report Thursday claiming that the North Koreans charged the United States $2 million for the medical care given to Otto Warmbier before he was returned to the United States in very grave condition. That's what we'll cover for the next few moments. And Gordon, thanks very much for being with us again.
Oh, thank you so much, Greg.
Well, let's start with the breaking news that the Washington Post is exclusively reporting, and that's that Otto Warmbier was returned to this country in a coma and that the North Koreans only released him when the U.S. agreed to pay $2 million. Now, we're also hearing from multiple sources, unnamed, that who insist the money was never actually paid, but apparently the promise was made at some point. What's your takeaway from this?
I think the most important thing is that the North Korean regime is the most horrific on earth. In this case, where they brutalize Otto Warmbier and then have the audacity to bill us $2 million for this. And this money, of course, will never be paid. We also got to remember that we will not have satisfactory relations with North Korea on anything, especially nuclear weapons, until there is a new government in North Korea, which is democratic. The Kim regime is just something that we can't deal with on a long-term basis.
And we'll get into that in just a moment. Let's talk about whether any precedent was set here. We know that it's not the policy of the United States to negotiate with terrorists or others making demands like this. As we've established, the money wasn't actually paid. But if, in fact, this was at least agreed to just to get his body back to the United States, does that set any sort of precedent, or was this kind of an isolated incident, do you think?
Well, one could say something like this will always set a precedent, but it's clear that the precedent is that we will not pay. We will go to great lengths to bring back Americans, as we should, but we're not going to make a payment of this sort, and I think dictators understand that.
Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-Un meeting in Vladivostok this week. Why are they meeting, and what do they want from each other?
Well, Kim Jong-un, of course, wants sanctions relief, and he hopes that the Russians who sit on the Security Council will give it to him. Also, I think that he wants some Russian investment into his ransom port, which is in the northeast part of the country. Russia and North Korea have an 11-mile boundary. This is a especially strategic and important area because this 11 miles prevents China from having access to the Sea of Japan, what the Koreans call the East Sea. And I'm sure that Kim Jong-un wants Russian investment there to show to the Chinese that he has another sponsor. On Russia's part, they're just troublemakers. They want to make sure that everyone understands that they're relevant, and Putin can do that by a summit of this sort.
What could possibly happen here by North Korea pitting the Russians and the Chinese against each other?
This is something that the Kim family has done for decades. Kim Il-sung, the founder of the regime, and Kim Jong-il, his son and the father of the current ruler, continually played Moscow off against Beijing. And later on, they brought in Seoul into this particular game. So this is something which comes out of North Korean diplomacy. It's something that we've seen regularly in the past, and we shouldn't be surprised that Kim Jong-un is raising it at this time, trying to get the Chinese and the Russians to compete for his affections.
We're talking with Gordon Chang, East Asia policy expert. The book is Nuclear Showdown. And Gordon, I remember from our prior conversations that you were obviously always very leery of President Trump meeting with Kim Jong-un. And as the two summits have unfolded, that skepticism has certainly increased. And it's just in the last few minutes here, though, that's the first time I've heard you say we're not going to get anywhere with this leader. I think you always probably thought that, but you're saying it more definitively now. What convinces you that this is not going to work as much as the president wants it to?
Well, the problem right now is that President Trump has effectively given Kim Jong-un sanctions relief over the last 11 months by not vigorously enforcing rules. Nonetheless, the sanctions that have been in place have crimped North Korea. And until President Trump goes back to vigorous enforcement of those sanctions, we're just not going to see progress. We have to understand the nature of this regime. I think President Trump probably does so because I think almost every American understands the horrific nature of North Korea. But until we have a more clear declaration of that from President Trump, we're just not going to get anywhere.
Any reason for them to meet again?
Not until the North Koreans give us two things. One of them is a declaration of all missile and nuke facilities, and the second thing is a firm timetable for disarmament. Until we get that, I don't see that there's any point in getting the President of the United States to give further legitimization to Kim Jong-un by meeting him.
And in addition to the summit that yielded nothing in Hanoi, we also, in recent days, in addition to the Putin-Kim summit, have seen a resumption of at least some testing, as well as the North Koreans saying they don't want to negotiate with our Secretary of State anymore, which is obviously going to be a problem. So what are the lessons from those two developments?
I think the lessons are that if you try to create this favorable environment for Kim Jong-un, which is what President Trump said, he was going to give the North Koreans a one-time shot to do the right thing, that the North Koreans don't reciprocate gestures of friendship. Unfortunately, the North Koreans really react only to coercion, and President Trump is going to have to go back to those policies that people don't like in a sense, but those are the only policies that will make him successful. President Trump was extraordinarily successful through the middle of May of last year when he had his maximum pressure campaign and didn't leave the North Koreans any choice but to move in the right direction. When President Trump released that pressure, then the North Koreans decided it was open season on the U.S. So we've got to go back to really enforcing those sanctions to the point where North Korea doesn't get any money. Because if North Korea doesn't get any money, it'll realize it will have to give up its nukes and missiles.
Do you think it's likely that the president will go in that direction? One of the things that he struggles with from time to time is admitting that the course of action that he was on was not the right one. So he's going to have to admit that this didn't work. Is he prepared to do that, do you think?
I think that he is. If you remember at the news conference after the Singapore summit, and this was just hours after the meeting with Kim Jong-un, President Trump did talk about what would happen if he were wrong. And he said, well, look, I probably wouldn't admit it. I'll probably blame something or another, but I will change my mind. And I think that that's where we're going. And eventually, I think Trump's going to have to do that, because if he doesn't, he's going to subject himself to all sorts of criticism in the run-up to the 2020 election.
Last question. What level of urgency would you attach to this? His need to get tougher on the sanctions again and the threat posed by the North Koreans and their missile program, their nuke program?
Yeah, I would do this right away. And the reason is that the more time we give North Korea to stall, two things happen. First of all, the North Koreans sell more missile and nuke tech around the world. And second of all, it gives more time to Moon Jae-in, the South Korean president, to undermine democracy. Moon is trying to unify the two Koreas, and he seems to be willing to do it on North Korea's terms. He's clearly undermining his own democracy by going back to a more authoritarian style of governance. This is not a good development for the South Korean people or for the United States. So I would change policies right now.
And that's a conversation that we would love to spend more time on. Hopefully we can do that soon. Gordon, thank you very much for your time today, and we do hope to talk to you again soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Greg.
Gordon Chang, East Asia policy expert. He is the author of Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World. I'm Greg Columbus, reporting for Radio America.